Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies. We always like it when you subscribe to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Um, what the heck is an anomaly? I think of an anomaly as something that's just different. That's not the same as usual, and I think we're gonna go in that territory tonight. With me as my guest host, Dave Jinks, and we were just reminiscing about good times in the old country. And how are you doing, Dave?
I'm doing well, Dan. Thank you. Looking forward to the
Yeah.
discussion here today. It'll be another good one.
Yeah. Katie Paige was on our show many moon ago, and we interviewed her because she lived in a very interesting, kind of like a skinwalker ranch kind of place and had some kind of weird experiences growing up. But one of the reasons we want to have her on tonight is we have this bizarre fascination for bizarre animal deaths or animal mutilations. And Katie agreed to come on and talk to us about that. So, Katie, welcome to Anomalies. Good
Good
to
to
have
be
you
back.
back.
It's good to be
Yeah, good to
back.
be back.
Thanks for
Um,
having me.
tell us a little bit about how you arrived at this interesting subject of animal mutilations. I know you're involved with MUFON in the past. I don't know that that led you to bizarre animal deaths, but go ahead. Tell us how you got the bizarre animal deaths topic.
Yeah, I mean, look at it's taken over my life, these
Yeah.
anomalies.
Oh, well.
Um, and so there's I guess the best way to kind of for those of your listeners that aren't familiar with my story or my background, kind of this Rocky Mountain Ranch. It was known as the Clearview Ranch in UFO folklore, and it has the trifecta of things, and cattle mutilations is one of those things. So there's cryptids and like the Taos hum, there's strange hums and bangs, there's UFOs and orbs, there's a government UFO cover up, which I believe plays of an important role in a lot of the things that were happening out there. So, gosh, I hate to admit it, it's already been almost over 15 years of kind of diving deeper into these things. And cattle mutilations for me was something I avoided for a while because we have so many great experts that have kind of taken that on. And unfortunately, we just lost one of them recently, Christopher O'Brien, did a
I
lot of
thought I
work in
heard
the
about
valley.
his passing.
Yeah,
Yes. Too
passed away
bad.
unfortunately. And of course, Linda Moulton Howe for me, um, back I found out about the ranch of my childhood that it was ever investigated. We never knew anybody knew anything about it or that it was reported. And it wasn't until I bought Hunt for the Skinwalker and started reading the other hot spots chapter, and they started talking about the Colorado Ranch, and I was like, oh, I know the weird dynamic of the situation going on there. And even though the names were changed and the location was changed, in this book it referenced three different PhDs out there, one of which was Dr. Leo Sprinkle. Wrote him an old school letter. He wrote me back confirming everything, and the rest is kind of history from there. But Linda Moulton Howe at the time was an investigative journalist, and come to find out later through records and stuff, she actually lived about, I don't know, 15 minutes from my childhood home as an investigative reporter. Not near the ranch. I didn't live on the ranch permanently. I lived about 45 minutes away from the ranch. My mom dated the gentleman that owned it. But anyway, so I figured, that's kind of her territory. She did a lot of great work on that. Chuck Zukowski too. He's out here in Colorado as well. So it was a topic, and on top of that, as we all know, there's like so many, like, people will say no, it's all the government, it's satanic cults, it's this and that. So it's one of those mysteries that it's a tough one. But just recently, I've been doing more and more on it because at Contact in the Desert this year, which is out in California, it's the end of May, into the first part of June. I will be speaking about the Snippy the horse case, which Snippy the horse is really the first nationally recognized animal mutilation death. Now, that being said, there were reports of strange things going on and other mutilations happening. I mean, as early as the late 40s into the 50s, earlier than Snippy, but Snippy certainly was the one that made national news around the world and kind of, you know, put a name for the animal mutilations, but gosh, there's just so many reports of many different types of animals. Even talking with like Paul Sinclair in the UK, they had like kangaroo mutilations,
Really?
dog disappearance, dog mutilations. I've heard seal mutilations. I just heard cats, right?
Hmm.
Um, so unfortunately, like domestic animals, and I do think there's elk and other wildlife, that deer and elk that we don't necessarily track, that are victims of mutilation as well. And then of course, you have that small little sliver of the human mutilations, that there are reports of those as well. So
So, well, how would you define a mutilation? What
right,
what uh, what makes something a animal mutilation?
yeah, there's classic telltale signs of a classic mutilation. Number one is usually you will not find a drop of blood around the animal. The blood will be completely drained of these animals. The classic cauterization, these very clean, you could take a knife, or even, they'll have serrations, but these are cauterized, clean cuts. You'll have certain organs that are removed, and there's certain areas that are most typically the tongue, the eye, the ear, the rectal, certain other organs within, sometimes even the brain cavity, as within Snippy. Snippy is an outlier, and I'm really excited to share this case at Contact in the Desert. So, there's been a lot of misinformation about this case, because the original report of the case, which was through the APRO organization, which is kind of a precursor to MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. APRO stands for Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, and those
Hmm.
files went missing for over 35 years. Just
Hmm.
gone. And long story short, David Marler, with his National UFO Historical Record Center out in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, just acquired. So one whole section of his wall, kind of like back here. It's all the APRO files. So it's open to the public now. You can go to his website and make an appointment. If you're ever in the area of Albuquerque, I highly recommend going to his website and make an appointment to go down there on the weekends. Because he not only has the original APRO files now, and we're talking mind-blowing cases and photographs and just unbelievable things, but he has original Blue Book and NICAP and CUFOS, and I mean, you could spend 2, 3 years and still not go through everything he has in that archives. It's just unbelievable. So, um, out here in the San Luis Valley, it's down south of Colorado, in between Colorado Springs and Trinidad, is where Snippy the horse was mutilated in 1967. And the King family is now going to have some events every year out there in the San Luis Valley called Dark Sky Events. And so they, heard about me and the Rocky Mountain Ranch and contacted me to kind of help build this event for them. And um, so that's kind of started my connection with the King family. Nellie King owned the horse. And one thing led to another. And before you know it, I find out, Dave has the original APRO files. I'm down there, stacks of stuff. I mean, there's so much about Snippy the horse case that it's taken months and months. So there, my Rocky Mountain Ranch partner Tony Angiola and I are going to have a new book out called Snippy the Horse: A King Family Legacy. And since November, we've been doing a deep dive on it. And the first piece of misinformation I'd like to clarify is that Snippy was Snippy, a 3-year-old male gelding horse, not lady. Because I have you guys heard that Snippy is actually lady? Have you heard that one?
I may
Oh no,
have
you
heard that.
haven't? Yeah. Well, I'm happy to announce that we have the original photos of little baby colt 1 day old Snippy with mom lady. Actual photos, never seen before photos. And then we have, so on the King Ranch at the time, there's so much to this case, it gets pretty deep, so much evidence, as if you will. But there were 4 horses on the King property. One was a black horse named Smokey. Smokey died the week before Snippy was mutilated, which is really fascinating. And they had other animals go blind, and their neighbor actually was known as the oh, what was it called? The Mutilation Ranch, because they had so many cows
Hmm.
mutilated there. But so, and then there was Snippy, the Appaloosa. And then we had Lady, and Lady was a dapple gray who was 1,200 pounds and 14 hands high, so much bigger than Snippy, and she was gray. And then there was a horse named Sheba on the ranch who was a brown horse. So we know where all these horses came from, and so by the time Snippy was mutilated, Smokey had just died the week before, so that left 3 horses on the property. Um, and then what's really cool, and I can't wait to share at Contact in the Desert, um, the horses were all very friendly and would take sugar cubes out of your hand and would come up to you and you could pet the horses and that. After the mutilation of Snippy, Sheba and Mom Lady were very skittish. And so we have photographs of some of the APRA reporters try to pet Lady after Snippy was mutilated, and you couldn't really even get near the horses. Something very much spooked them. We got original maps that were hand drawn of like the 3 horses. You can kind of track, how they were being zigzag, like something was trying to corral them. And then the 3 prints of the horses go down to 2 that run back off to the King Ranch. And then you see Snippy going in circles, and then 25 to 30 feet is dropped from above. Something that is also interesting with all these new photographs that we have now available to all of us to see is Snippy's back right leg was broken as if dropped from above, and Snippy's back leg was also cleaned of skin. It was just pure white bone, just like from the shoulders up to the head. So Snippy, had that cauterization. His whole head and everything was just missing. Super sad case. Brain cavity missing. There are marks in the ground. There's a 75-foot diameter ring, which is interesting and connects to the Rocky Mountain Ranch because we had a 75-foot diameter snowless circle where nothing grew. Same at the Snippy case. Plus, they had an additional 5 other circles that were 15 inches in diameter. So we have that. We have holes in the ground. Nellie finds in the Chico brushes that are normally 5, 6 feet tall. There's a few around the Snippy site that were smashed down to like 6 inches to the ground. And in one of these Chico brushes, she finds this tool, and it's like this. It's described in the reports as like a shape of a gizzard, but it's like a seaweed kind of thing. And they pick it up with a stick and they kind of poke at this thing, and green ooze comes out of it, and it ends
Wow.
up burning Nellie's hands, and it's burning for like an hour, and she's trying to get it off and whatever, and she had to go back to her ranch house 4 miles away and wash to get the burning to stop. And there's this green ooze around the Snippy site. There were 3 fence posts sheared off as if like a razor sheared them off. So this and much more. And what's really neat about this, and now having the photographs, like I mentioned, we have evidence of this in the photographs, right? And shocking things, like they even took castor plasts of these holes that were in the ground around Snippy, and they compared it and talked to, and I have pictures of them with Lonnie Zamora in the Socorro case,
Right.
comparing the indentations into the ground. Now, other than the fact that their indentations are not very similar, but it's kind of cool. You have a picture of, them talking to Lonnie Zamora out there comparing those castor plast casts. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting case that just kind of set the whole mutilation thing on its head. And in doing this book and researching more about horse mutilations, I mean, there was one out in Rocky Mountain Ranch as well, that Bill Waugh talks about in Linda Moulton's How. There's a film called A Strange Harvest.
Mhm.
And they talk about one of the horse mutilations out there at Rocky Mountain Ranch too. So
Hmm.
Dave, jump in here anytime you want.
Well, that's a lot of different types of evidence all kind of wrapped up in one case. Do you think that's because it was so unique at the time and so unusual and everyone jumped on it and said, hey, we gotta, really, or was it just lucky that there were enough people around to see it and they were diligent in collecting evidence and so forth? What's your feeling about that?
well, in the San Luis Valley, first of all, it's a really interesting area and I'm learning more about it, but I didn't realize that in the United States, NASA actually has used that site and still does for astronaut training because
Hmm.
There's certain areas that are very volcanic and very much resemble the lunar surface. So I thought, whoa, I didn't know that. But there's been sightings and strange, mysterious things around the valley. Hence, I think I have one of his books lying here. Chris O'Brien did several books on just the valley alone because so many unusual things are seen there. And so, but I think as far as the Snippy case, I think it was the opposite in that we didn't talk, we meaning, the public at large didn't really talk about animal mutilation deaths until after Snippy. So I think, even with Nellie and everybody there, they were just so puzzled by this. And there were many different theories at the time, like, oh, the horse was struck by lightning, and they did their due diligence in talking with all sorts of experts to rule a lot of these theories out. People that wouldn't even come to look at the carcass were like saying all these crazy different theories. Like the craziest theory to me, which to me is just absolutely ridiculous, because I mean it's just crazy, especially because the ground was a little muddy and stuff at the time. There was some rain going on, but one one of the theories was that it was just this big hoax, and somebody built this like tripod, drug a barrel of acid out in the middle of the field, hung the horse up, dipped its head into the vat of acid, and then set up this whole scene and made this, and it's just like, are you kidding me right now? Like, so it's just silly. But I really think that at the time they were just so puzzled, and they didn't know a lot about other mutilations at the time. Now we know what they are and we can identify them pretty quickly. But back then, no, they were just like, what happened to this horse? And
Just
then
it
at the
seems like
same time, even that day, so we believe Snippy was actually mutilated on the 7th. Um, Agnes King sees basically a UFO going over the ranch house. And through the reports, too, we find out that there were witnesses. There's a cemetery called the Uraka Cemetery nearby, and there happened to be one of the Kings. Agnes King had, I believe, 12 children. 6 of them passed away before Agnes passed away. And one of the little girls were twins. There was Faye and May. And I believe it was May that passed away at age 12 from an illness. And she's said to haunt the cemetery up there in San Luis Valley. Now, there's rumors too that Nellie now haunts the cemetery as well up there. And her death is very, very sad and unfortunate as well. She unfortunately took her own life the day of her mother's funeral, right on top of
Mm.
on her mother's grave. So they were very close, and it's super sad story. So there's all these kind of twists and turns to this Snippy the case, a horse case. But the night of Snippy's capture date, we call it, there were witnesses, the Wilsons, out at the Uraka Cemetery, just kind of sky watching and doing their, because there were so many things flying all over the valley through this, well, 66 into 67, and they see lights over the King Ranch the night of Snippy's capture. So we do have a witness to his abduction or mutilation.
it seems like a perfect storm of the location, the witnesses that happen to be there, again, the diligence of people to notice, hey, this is something really important. And it's kind of one of those things that we look back, a seminal case, I guess you'd call it, like Roswell or any number of, big cases that we all know about. If you're even, you know, casually looking into some of this stuff, you've heard of these particular things. And in hindsight, you can look back and say, hey, that was the big one. That was one that
Mhm.
kicked off an entire area of inquiry or whatever.
Yeah,
Um, but
for
I'm
sure. I
I'm
mean,
in
this is like the case that went viral before viral was viral.
yeah,
You know?
exactly. Viral, and now everything goes viral,
Now
whether
everything's viral.
or not.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, it kind of messes up it's just so hard to focus on any one particular thing these days. But
yeah.
that Snippy was one of those cases. Now, do you know, was it John Altschuler?
Hmm.
Uh, he, is that the right name? It's been
It's
what?
funny you would bring that up. I just spoke with his daughter on the
Okay.
phone the day before yesterday.
I'm just okay. So I'm wondering if he had gotten involved in the whole scenario yet, or if that wasn't until much later.
It was within that 6-month window there. He had seen the UFO sightings and the Snippy case in the papers and was very curious about that and wanted to go out there, took the family and the kids to kind of sky watch and stuff, had his own unique experience that we talk about in the book. But
Mhm.
yeah, so he was a specialist and he actually invented some things in he was a doctor and he invented blood cauter, like when you do surgeries and you have to
Mhm.
cauterize the blood and stuff. So I know they wanted a blood expert to look at that and had some lab reports done, which those are also in the file. So we do share the results of some of those tests that were done on Snippy. But unfortunately, he has passed away. And like so many of us in the world, when you have a profession that doesn't include all these strange anomalies and things, it can affect your careers and that. So
Mhm.
they're pretty hush hush about it and really have tried to walk away from it the best they can. And just like within my Rocky Mountain Ranch case, the boys that grew up on the ranch that were there way more than I was there, they all moved out of the state of Colorado. And I have contact with the youngest son, barely on Facebook, but they're like, that was a scary time in our life. We just don't want anything to do with that anymore. And that's okay. I understand that completely. Um, you know, not
So do
everybody
you
likes
see
to get, what's that?
I'm sorry to in these cases, do you see a progression? Dan and I on this show talk about so many different things that seem
Mhm.
very uh, separate from each other in a lot of ways, but then they all seem to reflect the same parts of human nature, no matter what, whether you're talking about crop circles or cold fusion or mutilations or UFOs or anything else. And there's kind of a progression, and you, Katie, alluded to how ridiculous it gets at a certain point. First, there's an anomaly. Um, People get interested in it because people are naturally curious about anomalies, or at least some of us, many of us are. Other people go running, screaming away from it. But you have people who get interested, and then the so-called experts or the skeptics or the, critics, whatever you want to call them, come jumping in. And I think when when you hit a point when the so-called explanation is more ridiculous than even the combined weirdness of the event or the situation you're talking about, that's when you hit some sort of critical mass. And you explained, you described how people tried to say just stupid, ridiculous things about they brought a vat of acid in, they must have used helicopters or whatever to lift the horse, and then they faked this and hoaxed that. Well,
Mhm.
there comes a point when a rational human will look at it and go, okay, that's ridiculous.
Right.
We're dealing with something that's real and needs to be discussed. And that's the point where I think we're separated into groups. Again, some people put it out of their mind or literally will not look in the telescope, as the metaphor goes. And then there are other
Good
people who are
analogy. I like
very,
that one.
very, very attracted. And in fact, by looking at your wall behind you, I might say and my wall here, some of
Hmm.
us become obsessed with it. And so my question after all this is, how do you deal with those two groups of people? I mean, how do you walk the line between trying to live in the real world and this bizarre world that we're all interested in? And you mentioned that people sometimes will just leave the town because they don't want to be associated with the weirdness, or they want to get it out of their mind, or they were terrified. How have you walked that line? Because you've been doing this for quite a number of years, right? 15, 20, whatever has your interest gone back to childhood even in some of this weird stuff? Or was there a moment when
No,
it,
not in childhood. I was, my sister and I were kind of told not to talk about what was happening out there. We were thrown. I don't know if you remember from the first show, but there was that weird disembodied electrical voice, which now,
I do remember that.
yeah, but now I've since that the show I was on here, I've learned of like plasma ball technology because one of the questions I had was how much was government black access projects and were they experimenting with plasma ball technology, which is a way they can pipe human voice sounds out to a distance. And when I heard the playback of what that sounds like, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's very similar to what we heard. So I don't know if it was ET related, could have been our own tech. Um, but for me, that fine line, it's a really good question. I have many thoughts about it actually. first of all, I think we have basically two, and it could be two because people's ages. So we all have our cycles of our life. And, when we're in the midst of career and job and family and things, we don't have a lot of time to sit and go berserk over this kind of stuff. We can dabble in it a little bit and watch some shows, but, to the obsession point, it's like you don't have time. I shouldn't even be doing what I'm doing because it's like, but for me, through the research, I have noticed that, like, a good example of this is I didn't know when I went back to the Rocky Mountain Ranch what the family that had bought it after, my mom's boyfriend's family, um, if they were experiencing similar things or nothing at all. I had no idea. And so you talk to the three people that live there. There's Greg, the father, who's a hardworking, likes to work on cars and build things and very hands-on. And then there was Chris's wife, and unfortunately, after season 1 of Beyond Skinwalker, she passed away, but she had experienced the shadow figures in that. And then there's Nicole, the daughter, who was born and raised on that ranch property. And the more we talked and got to know each other, the more she's like, "Oh yeah, I always felt watched, that sense of being watched, or the shadow people in her rooms and paranormal type of things, this hitchhiker effect." So and through just regular reports, just if you have a UFO sighting, you're camping, whatever, and you're with a group of people, people will experience it different, will remember it different. Some people will, I don't know what you're talking about. And there's something to that, even with ghost hunting, before I got into the whole UFO side of things, I was really interested in the hitchhiker side of things, the paranormal ghost stuff, and did some, St. Augustine Lighthouse and the Stanley Hotel and things like that. And it seemed to me, even back then, when I was like hooked on the show Ghost Hunters, I noticed that it seemed like the believers, meaning more like, if you're familiar with that, like Jason and Grant would have stuff happen
Mhm.
all the time, and Steve and Tango to maybe a little lesser degree. But then you would have sometimes you'd have people that were more like, I believe her name was Chris Williams, who was a little less of a believer, and not a lot of stuff happened to her. And I kind of noticed this pattern with people, like, okay, which says to me that we are active participants in the phenomena. We have to engage in it. And I think part of that too, um, talking with so many experiencers through the years, um, there's this disassociation piece that occurs, whether it's through near death experience, through trauma, through meditation, whatever means you kind of disassociate from your body and you kind of go out into the ethers. That connects you into something. And once you have that connection into something, I believe it stays with you forever if you're open to, if you're tuned into it and paying attention. You have to pay attention. If you're not paying attention, and like Greg is tinkering on the car and is just totally oblivious to things that are going on around him, not in a negative bad way, but just the paranormal, weird, anomalous kind of stuff, then you're not going to notice it and you're not going to interact with it. So we are definitely participants in that. And for me, walking that line has been interesting because there's so much high strangeness on this ranch that it doesn't take much to make you sound a little whoop out there. And I have that side of me that loves, like, my documents and paper and all these reports. I mean, like I like getting the FOIA and all the documents and stuff. And so I have that side of myself, and I have a skeptical side of myself that I think the vast majority of what we're dealing with is our own stuff. Um, but then there's the weird high strange stuff I can't dismiss. And that has to become part of the equation. So it's a fine line, and I'm always trying to kind of walk it like, ooh, you know. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
It does. It feels like tiptoeing through different realities, and sometimes you're
Mhm.
not sure which. If you do have that skeptic side of you intact, it's hopefully that voice stays there, always saying, "Now, are you reading more into this than you should be?" And but then there's that other
Mhm.
side going, "Come on, you've seen so much of this, and so much of it is anomalous and weird.
Right.
No, there's stuff beyond behind the veil, and so to speak." And that some people hate that feeling because it's very uncertain. It's like I want to know for sure what I am and where I fit and all that.
Mhm.
And I think that's why some
I
people
think though,
run
once
away
you do
from
this
it.
long enough, and you guys know, because you've been doing this for a while, um,
Mhm.
there's certain little things like, for example, I was just reading just a few hours ago a case of a woman who had this amazing, and it was about a missing dog. Because there's a time, it was in the 1950s, that dogs were disappearing in connection with craft sightings. And this woman states that like she sees this huge craft in front of her yard and her dog, and then she gets the dogs in, and then in the report it states that she goes to bed. So the big craft is out there, and she's like, I'm tired. I'm gonna go to bed. And so it's reports like that. I go, that doesn't seem right. Unless there's some sort of weird, like you're hypnotized and the aliens are
Hmm.
making you go to bed. Maybe that's what it is. But some reports you can read and go, that's BS, you know?
Yeah, there's some pretty weird stuff like that. It's you think I would never act like that, right? But there's so
Right.
many people who do
Yeah.
act seemingly that it seems like they are on some under some sort of spell or
And like a trance.
hypnotized, in a trance. But I don't want to sidetrack us into more broad things, even though we love to go there. But Dan, why don't you ask Katie some questions about actual mutilations, because that's what we're here to talk about.
Well, well, one of the first things I think I heard that when I first heard it, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. So I'd be interested as to Katie's uh, rebuttal to this, that most cattle mutilations or animal mutilations are caused by satanic cults. Why is that a bunch of BS? And maybe it isn't. And maybe I've just come
There
to
might
think
be
that.
there might be a few, like a handful of those, right? And that's the thing. I think we always want it to be all this or all that or all
Yeah.
that. Well, maybe there's a sliver of that, but not many. I would say not many. That's the evidence. So if you're thinking about animal mutilation deaths going on in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and there's so many of them. There's thousands of them now, all different types of animals that like we covered. There's very, very little evidence of human interaction here. Not to mention, with some of the interviews I've done in Linda Howe's movie, A Strange Harvest, there's George Yarnell. He was the sheriff of Elbert County, and Bill Waugh was the undersheriff. And I flew to Florida and interviewed Bill Waugh's widow, Jean, and his son, Keith. And at the time, at the height of these mutilations from 75 to 78 out in Elbert County, we had Colorado Bureau of Investigations involved, and the Air Force, NORAD was involved. I mean, everybody was up in arms. It's reported all over the place, many newspaper articles. Linda Howe's out here doing her thing with the news. um in Bill Waugh's widow said in Bill Waugh's office at the police station in Elbert County, they had a map, and they're tracking these mutilations, and they're tracking. So let me see, where's my they had all sorts of here it is. This is a great document called The Choppers and the Choppers. It's a cool report. If anybody wants a copy of this, I have it on PDF. I can send it to you for free if you just reach out to me via katiepaige.net or Rocky Mountain Ranch Research .org, and I'll send it to you. It's really interesting to read. But he's pinning like mutilations occurring basically at the same time. And you had people that were arming themselves. You had a $10,000 reward, and you, you had mutilations occurring miles off the county road, no tracks, no sound, no needles, no. I mean, these are perfectly cauterized blood drain. How do satanic cultists, it's
Exactly.
preposterous. We have
Yeah.
cows found, in trees that are dropped. They're clearly dropped. Now, I can argue that maybe some of these are our own government grabbing them. Perhaps, maybe that's another sliver. So if you take a pie chart, right? Satanic cult mutilations, this much of the pie chart.
Hmm.
Our government, this much of the pie chart. Just, things that aren't quite true mutilations, that much of the pie chart. But then you have the whole rest of it that's like unexplainable, you know.
So I remember Linda Moulton Howe's either her book or her video. She was told that these mutilations are being caused by creatures who aren't from Earth. So once again, we're talking about they may fit the cause of these events may be a variety of different kind of things, but we well, for some reason want to stick them into one category, maybe because that provides a better explanation. So, what about that as an explanation? How many
Yeah.
mutilations do you think are caused by ETs, and why might they be doing this?
Right. I'm glad you brought this up because it reminded me. First of all, I remember the name of the neighbors of the King Ranch. It was the Dead Cow Ranch, the Wellington Ranch. So the Wellington Ranch was right next to the King Ranch, and they called it the Dead Cow Ranch. Anyway, I just like, thank you. Thank you, my butter that I have with my coffee, keeping those brain cells snapping. But
No,
anyway,
maybe.
there's so much to this case. But I'm glad you brought this up because another photograph we have at the Snippy the horse case is this really strange large track. It looks like it has claws in the dirt. It's not a horse track. It's not a bear. It's not a, you can rule out what it's not. They're very strange. They had these large cryptid creatures reported also out there at the Snippy site, very much like at Rocky Mountain Ranch. And we know that Stan Gordon wrote a book where he's connecting Bigfoot and UFOs. And
Right.
I feel like these are large animals. It would make sense you would have a Sasquatch, maybe is part of the mix with the mutilations. Whether they're bodyguards or they're doing something to these cattle. We have these strange boxes also reported at the Rocky Mountain Ranch, and it's also reported as we're doing the deep dive on the Snippy case, they see these black boxes as well. What are those? Are those stunning the animals? Are they freezing them? In talking with ranchers, ranchers will say on the pastures where the mutilations are being done. First thing that just within the last year, I'm starting to hear more and more about talking with the Millers in Trinidad and other ranchers. Oftentimes, these animals will be marked or tagged before mutilations um, in strange ways. Like they'll start spinning, they'll act weird, they'll act drunk, they'll like kind of separate themselves from the herd. But when talking with these ranch, and then they'll find them the next day mutilated. So I think that's strange. But on these pastures where the mutilations are being done, a lot of times these cattle are calm and herded together. And then the adjoining pastures, they're all freaked out and everything. So are these boxes, you know, stunning them, calming them? I don't know, but it's interesting. We've had several accounts of these strange, weird boxes in these sites too. And are those connected to ETs? But having cryptids reported alongside mutilations is also fascinating. What do the Sasquatch have to do with the mutilations? And
Mhm.
there's many cases where they're connected too, just like in the Snippy case and
We
out in
talked to
Elbert County.
Stan Gordon, and he talked about the connection between UFOs and Sasquatches. So, yeah, there's this whole, there's a tendency to want to put things in categories, but sometimes I think that does a disservice to the actual event.
Sometimes it can. I mean, it certainly complicates everything. um, for sure. Because, like, I mean, we hear people saying, are they good ETs, bad ETs? And not everything's one or the other. And it's the same with this as well. I've also heard it said that, there's different theories on why they're draining the bloods and why certain soft tissues. So even Christopher O'Brien, I believe, he had a map of the nuclear, like, testing sites and facilities. As in Rocky Mountain Ranch too, we had the missile silos right out there in Elbert County. Are they testing the soil? Are they testing, the tongues of the animal and the soft tissue? Um, Mad cow disease. I've also heard that maybe there's something in the blood that the ETs like, copper in the blood, that perhaps I've heard through people that have claimed to work at S4 or have interacted with extraterrestrials that they absorb nutrients through their skin. And are they using some of the organs, the vital organs of the cattle and animal in the blood and absorbing it into their skin for nutrients? Then there's the Carl Higdon case too, which is it has a box, it has the elk. So, I think there's an elk connection with some of these strange, I think they're snagging our elk on top of cows and other animals.
Tell us about that case you just referred to.
Yeah, the Carl Higdon case is out of Medicine Bow, Wyoming. Carl Higdon, this was in 1974. I believe it was in October. He was out there, got the day off of work. His other people that he worked with, I think he was an oil rigger, had the day off, so he decides to go elk hunting out in Medicine Bow there. He lived in, not Laramie, Wyoming. He lived in, what's the other? can't think of it right now. But anyway, he's out of Medicine Bow. Um, and sees a herd of elk, and he's got his new rifle and he's taking a shot at a bull elk, and the bullet goes, and like he said, it was slow motion, and he said it hits this invisible force, falls to
Wow.
the ground. They actually recovered. That's another great case to go. If you go to the American Heritage Center out there in Laramie, you can pull the original documents on this case with original photos, so you have the photos of the shell casing and things like that. But he encounters an extraterrestrial, which he said his name was also one. He has this strange appendage on his hand. He has this like straw for hair. Um, and he basically communicates telepathically to Carl Higdon saying, "Are you hungry? Obviously, you're hunting these elk." And he
Right.
floats these pills over to Carl Higdon. And he,
Really?
you know, shouldn't have, but he takes one of these pills, and and he takes them on. There's this big large box, and he takes the elk and Carl Higdon into this box, and they go to this other planet, and he says this crazy thing. But there's a lot of cool evidence in this case too. We have um the casing, which is turned inside out. They find his pickup truck in a mud bog, like a few miles away from where he had it parked, where you couldn't access the truck. So he goes missing. So he has missing time. His wife calls the authorities. You have a group of people searching for Carl Higdon. They find his truck in this mud bog. And why the search party is looking for him, they have a UFO encounter. They take Carl Higdon for medical attention once they find him. His eyes are super red and watering. They test his blood. He has high levels of certain things in his blood. So we have the lab reports in the file as well. I mean, this is one of those mind-blowing cases. There's this weird carving on an old aspen tree of Osso One. It's really weird. And there's a picture of the burnt grass of where the box was on the ground. So you have the photograph of like burnt grass of a box in the middle.
Hmm.
I actually just this last year went out to that location. I think it's important to go and kind of compare how it feels and what, I wanted to see if is it similar to the Rocky Mountain Ranch. And it's so weird because Rollins, that's the name of the town. So Carl lived in
Rollins, right away.
Rollins.
Okay.
Yeah, he lived in Rollins. So we stayed in Rollins and we basically retraced Carl's steps, right? We wanted to find the actual location of his experience. Kind of a bad idea maybe, because what's weird is you're well, the first time we went out there, we're driving along in my Jeep, and all of a sudden we get a road closure, right? And we're like, oh, why is a road closed? There's nobody out here for miles. Driving. Anyway, about 15 miles further, we figured out why they closed the road, because it was impassable with like blizzard and drifting snow. So we're like, oh, this was a bust, and drove back. But anyway, the second time we went out, it was no more snow. But it's like nothing. Like it's just wide open, not very treed. You could see for miles. Like I'm like, this is weird. But you get to the Carl Higdon site, completely different story. It's thick timber. It's ponderosa pine. There's water. It's very similar to the Rocky Mountain Ranch, kind of behind the ranch house. I'm like, oh my God, it felt like creepy. Like, what are we doing here? But anyway, so the locations are very interesting. But again, you have that elk there in that case. And then I know David Pilates talks about, I think he mentioned the Carl Higdon case in the elk. And then just recently, I have the, yeah. So this, I don't want to rip it. This is his original drawing, but out in Elbert County, this was a gentleman. He's an elk hunter and he has a business. He's a firefighter, a very good guy in the community. He's lived out in Elbert County for a long time. So he is out near where the ranch of my childhood is, which is by the Palmer Divide. He has his pickup truck parked. It's getting dusk. So he's walking back to his pickup truck and he sees an orange glow in the trees, and he sees what he describes as a 4 to 5 foot diameter with a red glow, very metallic, very shiny, 6 to 8 feet off the ground. The top is spinning counterclockwise, the bottom is spinning clockwise. He said this was approximately November of 2021, so he drew me what he saw. He watches this for several seconds, looks, and the thing's gone. But what's really weird is, so I went out to this location with him, and he said it's a part of the forest that and this is a big tough guy. He's like he feels uncomfortable going into this particular area. He's like it's like Fingon Forest from like Lord of the Rings or whatever. So we, the three of us, hike back to where he sees this thing, and right below it is an elk trail.
Hmm.
I mean, like a very defined elk trail. And I'm thinking there's another weird elk connection. In this very area there, they find mysteriously mutilated elk. So still going on. And just actually his neighbor last year had a mutilated animal during the day, a big prize bull, like a 5,500. That's how much the bull's worth. In the daytime, was out there in the morning, that afternoon mutilated. No helicopters, no satanic cults, no government. I mean, it was unexplainable, you know. It's very sad. And ranchers lose so much money. I don't know if you guys have you seen that series, that Expedition Alien with George Knapp? That
I don't think I have.
Oh, you gotta watch it. You would love it. The first episode, they talk to ranchers in Oregon, and there's I think 4 or 5 generational rancher that has unbelievable sightings. And in that episode, his son is actually taking a video of this beautiful bull elk just sitting on the hill. And right behind it, you see, and it reminds me of also one from Medicine Boat. You see this figure just kind of float like this behind him, like it's not walking, and the animal's not reacting to it. So whatever it
Mhm.
is, the animal doesn't react. You just see this figure. I'm like, ah. It's really interesting, and this is a guy who doesn't, you know, talk about UFOs and stuff, but he talks about like witnessing a UFO. He has the large circle like at Rocky Mountain Ranch, many mutilated cows. One actually was sitting up, like just sitting dead, not laying down, just sitting. Very strange. But he actually went to get his rifle to shoot at this UFO and the thing shot off. You know, I mean, this is in Oregon. Yeah, kind of your neck of the woods. You
Oh,
guys have mutilations too out there, don't you,
great.
where you are?
Uh,
I mean, I don't hear about them, but I'm sure you
no,
do.
I
Yeah.
mean, normally you think of Colorado or Arizona, well, Arizona, Nevada, Arizona. I mean, it's,
Texas, Oklahoma,
yeah, seems to be more
Montana, Wyoming. Yeah.
typical. Although I did mention we had that weird, in the pre-interview discussion here, we talked about a spree of like 13 cats that were
Mm.
mutilated in the Lacey Olympia area, which is where Dan and I are located. That was unresolved. Like pretty much every other mutilation case that's ever been investigated or discussed. Have you, Katie, ever heard of anyone being prosecuted for a mutilation?
I haven't. I think there was a couple cases where they may have tried, but I don't think they went through to fruition. And that's one thing I interviewed a couple years back. Going through all the old newspaper articles, I pull all the names, start a spreadsheet and try to contact them or family members to get it firsthand. And one of the people off that list, multi-generational, he's been ranching out here in Elbert County for years. And I actually, on my YouTube channel, I started a YouTube channel, Rocky Mountain Ranch with Katie Paige on YouTube, so check it out. But on one of those episodes I have on that channel, his name's Carl, and he has cattle still to this day, hundreds of heads of cattle. And up here in close to my house, in Woodland Park, Colorado, he has had 3 consecutive cattle mutilations every 4th of July night, 3 in a row. 4th of July,
Oh,
4th of July, 4th of July. And so we go out there. I go out there and it's on that channel and I'm looking. It's near a Red Rocks campground. It's under power lines. So as I'm standing there where Carl's cattle are, where they're finding these dead cows every 4th of July, not this last 4th of July, unfortunately, because I was scouting out. But there's no way helicopters are going in there dropping these cattle. There's no way. It's too dangerous. You can't even fly a drone there for goodness sakes, you know. Yeah, it's very unusual.
It
But
reminds me of the crop circle phenomenon where, to my knowledge, nobody's ever been even prosecuted, let alone convicted or fined or anything. And you
yeah,
got these, it's just in plain sight, a lot of this stuff. And this kind of is the same sort of phenomenon. But I want to
Mhm.
get a little sinister here, if we can. And I
Mhm.
want to bring
I
up,
like Sinister.
yeah, I figured you would.
Yeah.
Um, you have different camps, as in every area of like this area of study. I'll bring up Stephen Greer, who um, insists that alien abductions, which is a separate phenomenon, but probably not because it's all connected somewhere, right? But um, he says that mutilations are military operations. And you have probably on the other end of the spectrum is Linda Moulton Howe, who says this is an alien, a strange harvest by the aliens. Obviously, well, I was going to say, obviously, it can't be both. It definitely can be both because as
Mhm.
Katie was showing us the pie, you got certain slices.
Mhm.
It's a question of, is it 95% my labs, military abductions, or in this case, mutilations, or um, is it 15%? What we're trying to figure out is who's doing what, when, and how much. And even after all these years, I feel like I have no idea what's what.
Right.
I can't figure out, even after really putting all my brain power to this, listening all sorts of experts, it's so hard to figure out. And the sinister aspect, obviously, is if there are military operations to do this as a psyop, to sow fear in the populace, um, to plant the seeds of whatever's coming next. If this is a long multi-decade project to scare people into submission or whatever, there's all sorts of different theories. But whether it's military or if it's alien, it's very disturbing either way, of course. And I spoke to Linda Moulton Howe, it's been a couple years now, regarding the cat mutilations in our area. And I asked her, I said, Linda, if whoever's doing this, they're doing it out in the open, they obviously don't care that they leave the carcass sitting out in the middle of the field. They don't care if they leave evidence all over the place. And I said, why would they do it this way? Why wouldn't they just have their own herd of cattle up in the mountains somewhere where no one's ever going to see them if they're doing, uh, genetic experiments or whatever? Just have your own herd. You don't cause all this commotion and trouble. And I said, why do they do that? And she said, David, it's because they can.
Uh,
They want us to see the chaos. And
Meaning they.
whoever they are, I don't know
Yeah.
who they are. That's the thing, whether it's the aliens or the military. I could understand a psyop would be a psychological operation in order to convince the public at large of something or convince leaders of something. Obviously, trying to interpret the alien mind is much more difficult because we have no clue where they are in their evolution. But the other thing that plays into this, maybe the third leg or prong of this whole mess, is something that Dan loves to talk about, and what you're talking about today is the Skinwalker Ranch type places, the vortexes of weirdness where maybe multiple dimensions collide or whatever, and you get stuff popping out of it. You get Sasquatch popping out, you got aliens, you got weird black boxes, you got distortions of time and space and everything. I don't know what percentage of what is, makes up the entire circle, but what's your best explanation after
Mhm.
looking at all this for a number of years, Katie? What do you think? Have you come to any conclusions at all?
Yeah, I have. And that was one of my main questions, because in researching the property from my childhood, I wanted to know who owned it before, how long did it sit vacant, how much property did the Air Force Academy have at the time or Fort Carson? Why do we know soldiers were there? I had so many questions. And I find out that property sat vacant for 7 to 10 years. So to your point, if they wanted to kill cattle and stuff, or why just not work out a deal with the ranchers if they're just testing. So is this element of fear, right? Um, they could do it in such a different way. Um, and so in Laughlin one year, Richard Doty, who is a known disinformation officer, and I think he came into the Air Force in 1977, and so he was part of this kind of whole thing in the late 70s to the early 80s, and I kind of cornered him because I wanted to know, like, question number one, were you aware of the ranch in my childhood? And to my surprise, or maybe not so surprised, he said that he was, which is interesting. Why are you aware of that? Right? So is there a military piece to that? And what are you covering up? And then I asked him about the choppers and the choppers because there's so many reports of these mysterious choppers. And there's newspaper articles of these things chasing young kids on ranches, like
Hmm.
terrorizing people. Why in the beeping beep beep would you do that to children? I
Yeah.
mean, it pisses me off, quite frankly. And his answer was it was a diversion.
Hmm.
So look over here, pay attention to this and the mutilations and the choppers while they're doing, plasma
That.
ball technology and laser technology and whatever they're doing with the weapons and the nukes. Because it's always about weapons, right? They're always doing some technology with weapons or a psych op with people. Because in these documents too, I find out, this mysterious person that owns this ranch in my childhood, who comes from San Francisco and who I believe was part of MK Ultra, says he's taken legal LSD. So after Contact in the Desert last year, I interviewed this family, her father, and his widow. He was really high up in the CIA, and they owned a lot of the property over the Dulce base. So I stopped in Pioneer Town to interview them, and she talked about a program her dad was in, and they took what they called FM, which is fucking magic. Okay. And they were taking people from state hospitals, vagrants, homeless people, people in small communities and small towns, and doing these psyops with them. Now, my half brother
Oh.
at the time was in Pueblo State Hospital. Okay. So is that how we were connected into the ranch? Then like a month ago, I start, learning. I'm kind of, because of David Morehouse work on the ranch and all that, I started listening to the Gateway tapes. Okay, like trying, the out of body meditation. And I'm listening to the Gateway tapes, and all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, this is the same as what I went through during my ranch years. I was put in this program in the Denver Tech Center right by my mom's work. She worked for United Airlines as a key punch operator into this program. And this program, this doctor, he was the pioneer of the biofeedback program by Thomas H. Badinsky, PhD. So I do a little digging on Badinsky. He was a precursor to the Gateway program. So for a year, while I'm on the ranch, I'm being hooked up to things on my head, on my fingers, and I'm learning to upper and lower my body temperatures to get rid of my migraine headaches. So they told me at
Hmm.
12 years old, I'm going through this program in the Denver Tech Center. Come to find out, he did work out of Area 51. And I'm like, wait a minute. So I have a half brother in the state hospital. I have this weird crap going on the ranch. I have this program that I'm involved in, and I think it's all connected. And so, yeah, I think there's an element to all this stuff that is buried so deep within Black Access projects that we'll never get the truth of it. That doesn't, though, all of that doesn't negate the other things that you can't explain. So what I would love to see as a researcher and as an investigator, and I don't know who can take this out, anybody out there, if you can compile in one place, and there's so many people like we talked about earlier that did so much work, like, Tom Adams and all these people on these mutilations, but the really strange outlier ones, like the ones in Oregon recently, or my favorite one that I did an interview. Drove to Wyoming to interview a person who lived in Rama, Colorado in the late 70s. And she had just got married out of high school. They have hundreds of acres out there. Her husband's on horseback checking the cows for calves, comes across a dead calf. And by the way, my other witness, Carl Oker, just had another mutilated calf. So calves get hit often. Um, but she said her husband comes across his dead calf. There's four cuts in a perfect square. Top of the fur's removed, but the skin's still there. Thing's dead. Not mutilated yet. So he gets on the horse, goes back to the ranch house, gets my witness. They come back in the pickup truck. She said it took him about 20, 25 minutes to get back. The calf was mutilated, cauterized, blood drained, organs removed. She has a photo. She sent them. She sent me a photo of a calf when a coyote rips at it. Completely different. Um, Miles off the county road, only tracks around the calf were horse prints. No sound of helicopters. She said they felt watched. It felt evil. Um, it changed their lives. They were terrified them, terrified them. This was not the military. This was not a cult. This was something else. So if you could take those kind of cases that have this, the ones that fall in fallen trees or these weird outlier ones like at the Miller Ranch, you take those and you put them in a basket, and then you can take the other ones, and maybe then you can get the percentage on a pie chart. If somebody really looked hard at each and every individual case of mutilations. But until we do that, and maybe it'll be the smart computers. What's Elon Musk's new one? Gort. No, it's not Gort.
Doge.
Grok.
Grok. Gort.
Oh,
Grok.
God.
Grok.
Doge
I
too.
got get that in my head. Grok. But it's gonna take something like that to really sort through the data, because it would take us, a couple lifetimes to go back in time and unravel all this stuff. So
You're,
maybe
well,
someday because of that we'll get it. I don't.
you're right. Actually, I mean, that could make a difference. I was looking the other day at taking PDFs of books because, I see you got a ton of books. Dan has shelves of books. I have books. A lot of them are very obscure,
Mm,
but a shockingly large number of even the really obscure ones have been diligently scanned and turned into
yeah, like
PDFs.
this
And
one.
you can plop those into one of these large language um, machines or models, AI models, essentially, and it will summarize it and categorize it. And so if you get to the point where you're putting all these really weird things that aren't on the internet anywhere, that's the problem. If they're on the internet
Mm,
already, then these web crawlers, the artificial intelligence will eventually gather it up and put it in a database. But some of these books here they're just not out there because they're
right.
one time, one printing
Mm-hmm.
30, 40 years ago or something like that. But you can still find those and put them in an LLM, and you will have the most amazing database of
Yeah.
the truly interesting stuff, the stuff that hasn't been sanitized, like much of the web has been sanitized already. You go to Wikipedia and read about one of these cases, and it's just,
Yeah, and you
it
don't know
leaves
how
out
it
all
was
the,
investigated, who investigated, was true,
yeah.
was not true, and it's that whole problem again. There's a really obscure book, and Judy Messelin, who has the bones of Snippy at the UFO Watchtower, she's gonna
Mm,
give us a copy. So I'm like, thanks, Judy, if you ever see this. But it's
mhm,
called Bones in a Boxcar, and it's very hard to find. But you're right,
yeah.
get a copy of that, scan it. We've been doing a lot of that. You can't even see this wall after we're done here. I'll show you
Mhm.
this wall and stacks of books here. But I know Marlar's trying to do that as well, to scan everything into PDFs. And Schuessler's connection. John Schuessler just so graciously has been sending me things in the mail on the Snippy case, because we're trying to take everything. And really, it's hard when, now you have photographic record, and you have the whole story of, like, Snippy's dad and where he's from. He's
Yeah.
from Estes Park, and
Mhm.
how he mated with Lady, and we have all of that now. And she didn't have that then, nor did Christopher O'Brien, because it was all lost. So they only had the word of Burl Lewis, who, which the King family and through our research, we believe after Nellie died, he was so tired of being inundated with this case. He met a new woman, Barbara. He worked at the country club, the San Luis Valley Country Club. And how people, not to judge people at country clubs, but I'm sure he was so sick of the UFO narrative and all of this circus that was going on. Wanted a new wife, or a new life with his new wife, new wife with his new life, new life with his new wife. And you know, and so I think he kind of made these crazy tales about, no, it's really Lady. And then he says, well, Snippy's the horse I rode. Well, that wasn't true, because through documents we knew Snippy's trainer only taught Snippy to lead and hold. He'd never been saddled. He'd never been shoed. And so they were getting ready to saddle him for the first time the week after of his, it would have been the week after his mutilation. So that was a flat out lie. And then he lied and said, well, oh, the newspapers just made that up because it was a more colorful name. That's not true. We know Snippy the horse was a birthday gift for Nellie. And she named Snippy right away. And where the confusion we think kind of started with the she and the he and the blah blah is because Agnes King, who's in her 80s, says Snippy was a proud colt and like trotted around like he owned the yard. And she said, he reminds me of Jackie Kennedy because she trots around like she owns the place. So
Hmm.
that quote saying she's like Jackie Kennedy was very popular in 1967, but she made the comparison to little Snippy, who's a boy, to Jackie Kennedy.
Yeah.
Hence the mix up of he and she, and it just went
Gender.
crazy from there. And then you throw Burl in there, who's like, I want this to go away. And he thought he could make it go away by saying all these things to Linda Howe and to Chris O'Brien. Turns out not true. And it's kind of, it'll be interesting for me to see how, I haven't talked to Linda about all this yet and showed her the photos yet, but it's no fault of theirs. They only went on what they had and they didn't have those at the time. Nobody had those photos. So I'm really thankful for history. And if anybody has documents out there, please make plans to, like Christopher O'Brien, we just lost him. We don't know where all his research is. It's gone.
Hmm.
And that's super unfortunate. So if
It
you have
is.
anything, make sure you make plans to get it somewhere where it can be, like what you said, Dave, put into
Yeah.
PDF form and preserved for future
Well,
research.
and it will preserve the initial investigation, which is usually the best one because if people are
Right.
super motivated, they want to get everything right the first time. And then, like you mentioned, over time, you forget things. People get
Hmm.
older and they forget how
Memories. Yeah.
real their memory goes. They, like you said, sometimes have motivations that change over time. They just want to be done with it. They don't care anymore.
Right.
We lose that initial investigation, and especially because some of these phenomena that we've been discussing for it's been 40, 50, 60,
50.
70 years, and the very important initial researchers are dying away on a monthly basis. People pass away who were integral to this stuff that we have to preserve. Otherwise, we're going to lose it again and have to start over. And you don't want to be starting over in the age
Mhm.
of artificial intelligence and photoshopping everything, and everything's fake these days. I mean, that makes the 70s and 80s investigations that much more important too, because it couldn't have been faked back then, at least not easily.
I agree. I'm 1000% on board with you there. Right now,
Gotta
it's like
preserve
you
it.
don't know what is real anymore, down to the voices, and it's just weird
Oh,
for me. Like,
Well, one of the things I want to
yeah.
be cognizant of as far as being real is I don't want Katie to spend the rest of her life on this podcast with us. So we really appreciate your time.
yeah.
Katie, tell us about books that you've written. Tell us about websites that people who are listening to this podcast could go to. So do
Well,
the
this is my first book. It's been out a little while now, but it's Letters of Love and Light. It's 4 decades of UFO sightings and encounters and things shared with Dr. R. Leo Sprinkle, who was a hypnotist and a psychologist out of Laramie, Wyoming. And in a nutshell, I spent 3 years photographing letters people wrote to Leo from around the world, and I organized them into chapters like ET descriptions, on hypnosis, letters from children. Leo kept his return letters. So it's a cool book. There's a really cool early Snowflake, Arizona case in there. Predates the Travis Walton case.
bonus one,
There's
huh?
some Francis E. Warren information that has never been seen before that I pulled out of there. So that's the first book. In May at Contact in the Desert, the Snippy the horse, the King family legacy will be out. So look for that on Amazon, and that will
Okay.
have all the original photos in that book, all the original transcribed audio
Cool.
interviews. I mean, that's one thing the archives has too. Original interviews with Nellie and Burl, and so those are all going to be transcribed in there with the pictures of Lady after Snippy's death. That those are all going to be in there. That it's an unbelievable case. So I can't wait for that to come out in May, and then after that, and later this winter will be the Rocky Mountain Ranch books on the cover-ups, craft cattle and cover.
And you can get these on Amazon, or we'll be able to get them on
Yeah, and you
Amazon.
can check out Katie Paige, which is KatiePaige.net,
Mhm.
or RockyMountainRanchResearch.org. And please, please, please check out my new YouTube channel, Rocky Mountain Ranch with Katie Paige on YouTube. I have several videos on there, and I interview the Millers and talk a lot about mutilations and other things as well, high strangest things in the ranch and behind the scenes of Beyond Skinwalker and stuff like that. So trying to get videos out as quickly as I can, but they do take a little bit of work. But I try to get out on location and take everybody out there with me. So please check out my YouTube channel and give me a thumbs up and a like and a subscribe. You know that always matters.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah, it does.
yeah,
I will
looking to hit that
subscribe.
1,000 mark. Let's hit that 1,000 mark.
Well, we want to really thank you for your time, and maybe we could cajole you into coming back again
Yeah,
Hey,
sometime.
I would
you
love
know,
to. Yeah.
I want to share the most important thing I learned in this interview, which is that Snippy was the horse's actual name.
Yeah.
I
Isn't that
thought
awesome?
tragically, tragically, it was Snippy's actual name. I thought it was a nickname because of the
Right.
mutilation, right? But oh wow, okay. See,
No.
you learn something new every time you talk to somebody new. Well, Katie wasn't new exactly, but
Yep.
we'd like to
We,
talk again after your book or books come out, and you talk to Linda and learn some more stuff. It looks like you're
Yeah.
really on the kind of on the leading edge of all this stuff. So you're our go-to person for this particular subject.
Well, I appreciate that. And I thanks for having me on again. I have you come back anytime. Yeah. It's
Okay.
fascinating.
sure.
I mean, all this stuff is out here for all of us to learn and share. And I mean, it's not, I'm not taking credit. It's thanks to the King family and APRO and NICAP and all the investigators, Don Richmond and Ken Steinmetz and all these people. They're the ones that did the work. I'm just dusting it off and getting it out there
Mhm.
because it needs to be out there. The truth needs to get out there. And I'm happy that I was kind of the person that was able to do that. For me, what I learned through it, and I'm still learning through it, are all the connections to rock. I mean, it's just like,
Hmm.
whoa, I had no idea. So it's cool. It's a cool project to be able to do. So I'm very grateful I got to do that. So
Yes.
Well, thanks again, and hopefully our paths will cross down the road.
for sure. Thanks,
Okay.
Okay.
guys.
Thanks, Katie. All right.
All
Bye.
right, Katie.
Bye bye. All right. Well, thanks, Dan, for having me back on.
Anytime, Katie.
Yeah.
If
No, I
you,
was gonna show. Look at here. Like here's all
oh
this.
my God, yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah.
And then the paranormal is over in that corner over there. But
It,
I got the Marler gave me the I took a U-Haul trailer and I have Antonio Huneeus's a lot of his books here. But it would take you lifetimes to go through these things and they're all on different subjects and I'm like, well, to scan them all would be the goal, right? To get them out digitally
yeah.
for everybody. So that was a good point. You
Sounds
know,
like a project. If you're
Is-
ever in the Olympia area, come and see Dave and I, okay?
I will. I would love to. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Look for
Take care.
Sasquatch. Bye.
Yeah, that'd be fun. All right. Bye bye.